What if midlife isn't a crisis at all? What if it's actually a signal? In this week's episode of Don't Let the Old Man In, we talk about why high-achieving men are often not good at telling themselves the truth. What the research actually says about aging, including a Yale study that will stop you cold.
The stories we tell ourselves about aging matter more than we realize. How I think about aging is really going to determine how I age.
This week's guest is Peter Reek, the author of Shift, 7 Mindsets for Inspired Life, a book that I read 3 times on a single flight from Sydney to London. He's not a self-help guru that recycles tired advice. He draws on serious research, honest lived experience, and the conviction that the way you interpret this season of life largely determines how you live it. I'm Paul O'Sullivan, host of Don't Let the Old Man In, and I'm navigating my midlife by studying at Oxford, learning the things that nobody thought to teach us about the second half of life. If you're new here, you're welcome. If somebody sent you this, tell them I said thanks. This is your midlife learning podcast. The signals worth listening to, the stories worth hearing, and the quiet, unhurried work of becoming your authentic self.
Here's Pod O'Sullivan with Don't Let the Old Man In, a podcast from the Wisdom Vault.
Before we jump into what I suspect will be a great, deep, wide, and fun conversation, what will our audience learn from our conversation today? Why should they listen to us?
Hey, listen, I think we can start by debunking that, one of the biggest myths of adulthood, the midlife crisis, having a conversation about that. It doesn't need to be a breakdown, but it can be a signal that something deeper is happening inside of us. And then the surprising part, our midlife is determined by our mindset. Our mindset determines our midlife. And the way that we interpret this stage of life will largely determine it being lived out. And then I think that we can zero in on some of the 7 mindsets and some of the commitments that I've identified that I think help make midlife a positive experience.
Fantastic. Well, we don't know each other that long. We were introduced to each other by a mutual friend, but I was recommended your book, which I think I said to you, I've got many notes and dog-eared pages in your book, which I love. I read it. The book is called Shift, 7 Mindsets for an Inspired Life. And I read it on a plane from Sydney to London. I think I read it 3 times between Sydney, London, and back to Sydney. So wow. It's a great book. I really enjoyed it. You and I share, we might be 2 brothers from a different mother type thing, and that we both have had similar career paths, and here we are on the same podcast. So looking forward to it. I'm going to start with this, and you've already alluded to this idea. You said, and I said, most people dread the notion of a midlife crisis. Is such a common phrase in modern parlance, but do you frame it as a midlife transformation? Now, before we go into the general topic, when did you realize for yourself that whatever kind of restlessness you were feeling was not actually a upcoming breakdown, but indeed there was a launch pad to something else?
Yeah, when I take a look at my midlife transition, and arguably I'm well beyond the actual middle point in my life, but was anything that isn't the end or isn't anything that isn't the end or isn't the beginning, let's call it midlife. And it's a very real season for me. Like, I'm dealing with an aging mother, and my wife has had a recent health challenge. One of our daughters is actually navigating a custody challenge. So there's a lot of real things happening that hit you at a point when you have had enough life learning to roughly determine how you're going to approach any of these situations, and yet you're still living them live and learning along the way. So I would say my midlife, it changed shape. My thinking changed shape. The pursuits, I've always been an ambitious person. My ambitions started to change shape. And I think that's, when I think about midlife and where I am within it, I'm learning just along with everybody else. And I'm determined to learn the most that I possibly can from it.
You've had a successful entrepreneurial life. You've worked internationally as an expat-based leader. You've had your own recruitment businesses. You sold that, and you started over in your 50s. You went back to uni. What was it like starting over and sitting in a class with 25-year-olds again for the next time?
I actually loved going back to school, and I really enjoyed being in the classroom more than when I did my undergrad. Like I was studying subject matter that I was passionate about. I think I was at in the heels of COVID. I went back to school in the heels of COVID, so I was 55 and back in the classroom, and it was more of an adult learning program. So it was a bit of people later stage in life, but the intimidation factor was there. I hadn't been in school for a number of years. I'm in an academic environment, and some people were closer to that than I had been. So there was an intimidation factor. I didn't enter into it with full blown confidence. I entered into it more with a little bit of trepidation. Didn't necessarily raise my hand or insert my voice all the times that I wanted to, because for the fear of looking, not looking like somebody who should be in that program. But ultimately, I loved it. I loved the experience. I wish it was in person. I kind of grieve the fact that it wasn't in person. Luckily, all schools had transitioned online, and unluckily, all schools had transitioned online. So the progress. So it was like that intersecting. But I really, I started it thinking I'm not an academic, and I finished thinking, oh, maybe I should do a PhD. So there we go. Yeah.
There's time yet? As someone who's on that road, yes. There's time yet.
That's you. They brothers from another mother. There we go.
Yeah. I love what you said about, a little bit of intimidation in the classroom, etc. Because the irony is just studying positive psychology, right? The whole notion of applied positive psychology. For those folks who don't know what that is, can you tell us what applied positive psychology is? Because there's often noise around applied positive psychology in terms of where the boundaries are.
Yeah, I think, and sometimes positive psychology gets a bad rap. It's a relatively new phenomenon. So psychology had studied, for the most part, studied the challenges and traumas and whatnot that had got people to a certain place. And positive psychology is really that, what do I do with everything that is occurred in my life, with who I am, everything that's intertwined to combine to be the person that I am? How do I move forward? How do I focus on, how do I hold on to hope? How do I organize my thoughts, my thinking, my behaviors to help me make the most of what, where I sit in my life, and to have some semblance of a beautiful picture of what going forward could look like.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll come back to hope soon, because I was at a music festival this weekend in the 2 hours south of Sydney. It's actually a fantastic festival. A friend of mine has a farm down there. He throws a little music festival every second year. 400 of his friends come along. Anyway, we're hanging out, listening to some great music as the sun was setting down. But someone was chatting to me.
Does he have room for 401 friends? Could I be
in 2 years' time? You're welcome. You're on the list.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
No, it's good. But someone was just talking to me about this podcast, and they said to me, I love what you're doing. You're sprouting hope. So that wasn't the original intention of the podcast, but I'm a big fan of hope theory and agency. So I get what you're talking about.
Positive psychology is not bypassing pain. It's not pretending it's not there. It's just, who am I as a result of this pain, or with this pain as part of my previous existence, and how do I move forward? Acknowledging this pain and with this pain.
Someone said to me once, you never do a PhD unless you know what's the book you want to write as a result of it. And I think the corollary is, you never do a master's degree unless you know what book you want to write on the output of it. So well done to you for writing this book, I'm going to read 3 commitments that you outline at the very, very beginning of the book. And I'm interested in, of these 3, are there any one of these that high achieving men often skip or could skip on a regular basis? So you outlined 3. You said, lead your whole self well, tell yourself the truth, and practice radical acceptance are the 3 core commitments that you outline.
I think there's an argument to be made for each one of them with high achieving men, but I'll zero in on telling yourself the truth. High achieving men, high achieving people, we can be exceptional at avoiding through productivity. If we just keep moving forward, if we just keep things afloat, if we just create one more thing, and then a success can mask misalignment for a really long time. So I think that telling ourselves the truth, in the book, I present self-honesty as a doorway, and without, radical honesty, radical truth-telling to ourselves, it's really tough to move towards change or towards transformation. So we know how to produce, how to perform, how to guide, but sometimes we don't know how to, be honest with ourselves.
How much of that do you think is, Father, I completely agree with you, and that answer you've given has come up in this podcast time and time and time again from various guests in some form or other. How much of that do you think is down to, as we are indexing heavily on productivity and achieving and therefore being rewarded with all of the the trophies and the materialism, etc., we don't take time to pause and therefore just wonder, is this what we actually want? Because we've spent a long time striving to get these things, and now they're here.
Yeah, I think we talked earlier about midlife crisis and why that keeps coming up as a common theme in the general population and whatnot. I think that when we sit in a place where we prolong activities that should be focused, are more part of our first half of life, where the producing, the output, the figuring out who we are, gaining identity through what it is that we're building or achieving. When we prolong that activity for too long, and we don't take the time to look for, what's the deeper story that I'm trying to live here, then that's where we can get ourselves into a lot of, internal disconnection on that front. So not taking that time to pause, not taking that time to reflect means that you can't name where, where the things are, the things that you're really wanting to work towards versus the things that you're currently working towards. And you can't shift if you can't name it. So it's just actually taking that time to give ourselves space.
Peter, you mentioned the word shift there. Let me read out the 7 shifts you outline in your book. And I'm interested as to how you came across them in terms of these 7, but also which one you find more difficult for yourself. I can tell you which one I jumped out at me when I was reading this book from me. The first one is shifting to curiosity. Second is shifting to connection. Third is shifting to responsibility. Fourth is shift into alignment. Fifth is shift into befriending your body. 6 is shift into stillness. And 7 is shift into brave.
Yeah, and I think anybody who takes a look at these different ones are going to jump out to them as say, hey, that one's more second skin to me, and this one is going to be tough. Like the curiosity piece, I've always been a curious person when we see what's happening in our world today with all the polarization between different people who have, built up beliefs that they're inflexible on, that ingredient of curiosity, I think is a real missing ingredient in the world, and it could be a missing ingredient in our lives. So that's a beautiful shift. The connection piece, one that a lot, like specifically a lot of men struggle with that connection piece. We get into habits of what meaningful connection looks like, and we can slip into connection that doesn't really satisfy, or we can slip into just totally avoiding connection. So that connection piece, the one that I personally struggle with is this befriending your body. I think because I've always gravitated to work. I love working. I love exercising my mind. That the movement and actually caring for myself physically has always been a second shelf or a second tier piece for me. So that's one that I really like. I have to be very focused on to make that part of my regular routine.
Just a quick break. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I hope you are too. What I've been doing with these episodes is a couple of days after I record the conversation, I sit down, grab my ideas, and I put together my reflections on the conversation and what I've learned from them and what kind of sense am I making from them. That's called my reflections episode. I also try an experiment to actually apply what I've got from the conversation. You can listen to that in an episode. You can also download a simple handout on don'tlettheoldmanin.com/reflections to help you do the same. Back to the conversation. Well, Peter, thank you for giving us that overview. I actually also stood out looking at shifting into befriending my body when I was reading your book on a plane from Sydney to London. And I noticed I had a gin and tonic in my hand at the time. I'm going, okay, what is this telling me? And I read it again on my way back from London to Sydney, and I decided to make 2026 the year of befriending my body from a health perspective. Okay. So I've really shifted into that whole area. So I'm doing a whole lot of stuff in that regard right now because of that shift. I certainly have found in the past being brave, shifting to alignment, to stillness, those aspects for me have been quite easy. This aspect has always been hard. So I'm glad you wrote about it. Which brings me to the topic of radical acceptance. And you talk about this. And what struck me when I was reading your book is, as a man, society often suggests that we are most powerful in the first half of our life. And you're suggesting actually the second half of your life allows you to do a whole lot more. You just got to accept who you are and where you've come from in order to do that. And I found that really, really helpful. Can you talk to that idea a bit more?
We all travel a road. We all travel a road that gets us to where we are in midlife. That road for some is full of bumps, and some it's full of super deep valleys because of the experiences that they encounter. But here we sit. We're at a point in life where we have this history and we have this future. So the concept of radical acceptance is what role will my past play in my future? We have this this pivotal moment where I am who I am, and all the circumstances that I have experienced have contributed to who I am, and I have a future, and I need to factor in who am I going to be in light of the road that's got me here. And for some it's easier than others. For some, there's significant trauma. Radical acceptance is not about resignation. It's not about just whitewashing over everything that's got me to the point where I am, but it is very much a bit of a reckoning to say, this is me, and this is me going forward in light of where I've gotten to. So, and the radical acceptance piece, when we can just say, here I am in all of my entirety, then that's super freeing to be able to look forward. Ultimately, what happens with a lot of people through that process, if there is trauma or there is significant difficulty, then we get to a point where we can say, hey, listen, that has enabled me to be more of a support to people who have had similar trauma, so that it, like, when we can move from this has happened to me, not necessarily moving towards this happened for me, but happened to that this happened, this has happened, and I need to move forward in light of what's happened, and in so doing I may be able to help others as well.
And I think what struck me when I read that particular chapter, and I'd known this before, but for whatever reason, it really landed for me with the way, whatever way you wrote it. The radical acceptance is free of judgment or indeed shame. It's just going, here's what it is. And, in a business life, and you and I have led businesses and sold businesses, we understand that radical acceptance of the current state of the business is almost a normal state for any good or radical, any good or rational leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at a personal level, it's often more difficult. And for me, I just found the word liberty really came through in terms of, okay, you can blame a lot of things if you want to, or you can excuse a lot of things, or you can feel bad about a lot of things. But at the end of the day, you're still here. And all those things have brought you here. Now, the question is, what do you want to do go forward? And so that I found that very, very helpful. The other shift I thought was great, and this is, again, not new to me, but it's something I'm still exploring and still getting better at, is the shift into stillness, which you talk a lot about. The world will not stop, but you can, which I thought was a great phrase that you used. And what struck me as I was thinking about readers of your book or listeners to podcasts, including this one, is many men will have spent their life working and being productive, as you said earlier on, and equating rest with a lack of productivity. And maybe even rest is equal to laziness in some people's eyes. I certainly felt that for a while in the early part of my life. How do you build a stillness practice, or how do you practice stillness without feeling like you're giving up?
It feels sometimes like it's the antithesis or contrary to being productive, stillness, and yet we know it can be an incredible fuel for moving forward as well. So the stillness, the piece, stepping out of momentum long enough to give ourselves the opportunity to see clearly, and to see more clearly, it can be. It can help us, focus our intentions, focus our activities in activities that really provide a bigger return than just simply plowing ahead. So I'm going to say, for me, it looks a lot like walking. It looks like journaling, reflection, taking, building in some intentional quiet time into my daily routine as I'm practicing. I think the concept of just and for some that comes easier than others. Like I am do trend more to the quiet introvert side of things, and so so reflection has always kind of been a part of my fabric. But for others, where it hasn't been, some kind of organized reflection period, whether that's, through, anything from meditation through Peloton, for example, like practical tools. There's a lot of meditation tools out there that people can touch base with. I think reading, writing, reflection, even just the power of listening to music sometimes, just to, free your mind up. They say a lot of times that the best ideas, the best, most clarity comes to us in the shower sometimes. And quite often that's just because we're not doing anything else at that point. We're just focused on, a shower or a routine that comes as second skin, no pun intended. But the concept of just slowing ourselves down long enough to actually think about where we'd like to be, that's that's incredibly empowering.
Yeah. Which is not necessarily the same as, albeit similar to, goal setting, i.e., where do we want to be? But this is that ongoing reflection of who am I in that process, who am I becoming in that process. I've often said to particularly men who are very, very action oriented, that reflection is just a different type of doing. Because the concern is, hey, I'm not doing stuff and I should be doing stuff. Well, this is a different type of doing, but it's a really important type of doing. You and I, as I said earlier on, you and I have shared many paths in that we've both had recruitment companies, or we've led recruitment companies, and we moved into exec coaching. I've always been fascinated with narrative identity in terms of the stories we tell ourselves and the stories that make up our lives, the ups and downs, and how we often unwittingly they become part of our narrative. And I was really delighted to read something you wrote recently about one of your practices in your recruitment company was asking your clients a question, which was, so you were born, then what? And you got them to basically draw a journey map of their life. Now, as a recruitment company owner, that is a phenomenally unusual thing to do, but I would imagine a phenomenally interesting conversation that emerged for both them and for you in the process.
I love that question. We actually made a video that highlighted some of the responses we got to that question, because we asked it to over 2,000 people, and it was it was a trust expediter. It was like, here we sit across from each other. You're interested in an opportunity that we're representing. Help us get to know you in a way that is beyond what your resume reflects. And people, we were really light on the instructions, so people could take it where they wanted to. And the people who took it to the level of highlighting the actual milestones in their life that had shaped them into who they are, those conversations were rich, and they were rich quickly, and we got to understand them as people. Yeah, I loved it. I loved that process. Yeah.
I bet you were able to sell those candidates far easier than the candidates who didn't do that exercise.
Storytelling is a big part of recruitment. So the story of the people who you're representing, and yeah, like we had videos, we had people, people who were talking about big theme, moving countries. Moving countries was a big milestone that shaped people, and you just to hear the different, we had different people who had worked on movie sets, who like, some of the stories were just fascinating. So it was really, really fun. We use it in workshops for development as well, because it expedites trust amongst teams. Like when you're sitting across from a colleague who you have never approached or discussed anything in this format before, like, that's a trust expediter as well.
Oh, I can absolutely testify that, because I'm still in my other career, still doing some executive coaching and workshops. And I was recently working with an organization, and this is our 5th or 6th group in this organization. It's an Asia Pac wide group. So I think we've worked with the top 250 leaders by now. But one of the leaders in this group, we were bringing them through a similar process to what you've just described. And in the middle of the conversation, she stopped and she goes, I was through this last week. So what do you mean? She goes, my boss took us away for a leadership team meeting to to Kuala Lumpur. And after the first hour, we threw away the whole 2-day agenda, because he actually wanted us to go through this process, because he had been through this program a year ago and he found it phenomenally helpful. And so she then told the whole group that after a day of meeting her new colleagues, she knew more about them than her previous 5 years with her other colleagues, because of this process. Everyone going through that exercise similar to what you described, and sharing the insights and stories and the richness of relationships that grew because of that was, quite phenomenal. And it's a trust expediter for sure. I think it's also a trust expediter for the self, as in you yourself start to understand, here's my life. Here's why I do what I do. Here's why I've become who I've become. And that allows you to then, sit in the stillness a bit longer to go, if that's true, then who do I want to become? And how do I fashion that, which I think is the most powerful part of it.
Yeah, you can't really know where you're going sometimes until you. I think it's Maya Angelou who said, "You don't really know where you're going till you know where you came from." So I think it's a really good. It's a good. Just spending some time reflecting on the road that's got you to where you are. Yeah.
Let's just pause for a second. If you've made it this far, it must mean you're enjoying the show. We want to keep bringing you awesome conversations, but algorithms are like needy toddlers. They demand constant validation. So if you're liking this, please hit the like button, the follow button, the subscribe button, whatever button. It helps us land more great guests to keep entertaining you. And if you're listening to this on an audio podcast app, come over and watch us on YouTube. I promise we're reasonably photogenic. Back to the show. Peter, that's a nice segue into another part of your book that I found really helpful, where you outlined research that suggests the way we think about aging, be it positive or negative. So the stereotypical views of aging, the way we hold those for ourselves, have a direct health consequence. As in, the more we hold a negative view of aging, the more likely we are to age in a negative way for ourselves. Two questions for you. One, say more to that research, and B, when did you start noticing this for yourself, assuming that's true?
Yeah, good question. The stories we tell ourselves about aging matter more than we realize. So in the book, I try to talk about additive aging, aging that adds versus subtractive aging that takes away. And a subtractive mindset says like it's all downhill from here. And I think this is research that has been proven time and time again. People like Arthur Brooks speak to it with respect to, like, if we focus on what aging adds rather than it takes away, than what it takes away, we're going to have a better aging experience. I was really trying to pick up on a theme from Richard Rohr in my research in and around the fact of paradoxical thinking. I really wanted to prove that, being able to hold two things, aging is beautiful and aging is hard, simultaneously was the subject of my thesis. And I didn't actually get to proving that, but I think it's more how I approached it rather than the fact that it may or may not be true. But there's research, very strong research to indicate how I think about aging is really going to determine how I age.
It's one of the personal ironies, if you will, of setting up a podcast called Don't Let the Old Man In. I was determined to do this for myself, right?
Yes, exactly.
How do I stay in conversation with people for a long time to make sure I stay young, or at least young in mindset? Because I remember growing up and noticing that my parents, or indeed all of my friends' parents, many of them aged pretty fast once they retired. And I just thought, I don't want to do that. And the day I launched the first episode, I realized, that's the exact same month of the year when my dad retired. Look at that.
Wow.
And the sense of we're the same age. So I do firmly believe in the notion of we can fall prey to stereotypes, even if the stereotypes are only in our own head. But from an aging perspective, the stereotypes are very real. And therefore, holding light to what stereotype are you believing in is really important.
Yeah, if you assume decline, then you will live smaller. When we assume good things, then we can have a little bit more of an expansive view. We can start a podcast rather than retire. Yeah.
Or we can bring groups on holidays to Ireland or other parts of the world, as per your organization, which I'm sure we'll come to. That brings me to another thing, and it struck me the weekend. I mentioned to you I was at this music festival down 2 hours south of Sydney, and my wife and I were driving back, and we used to have a beach house halfway between that point in Sydney. And I said to her on the way home, shall we drive past Giroa and look at the old house? And she paused for a second and she said, no, I don't want to. And I said, why? And she goes, that chapter is over. I don't need to revisit it, which got me thinking around some of us grieve chapters when they're over, and some of us just move on because that chapter was then, we're now in a different chapter. You and I have both changed careers significantly in our 50s. Is there any part of you that grieves the versions you were before versus the versions you're becoming now? Or how do you think about that?
I have friends who have a similar story to tell about a place that they used to own in France. So I think it's fascinating to hear your story on that. I think I love building things. I loved building teams. If I grieved anything, it would be that I've built some beautiful teams and I no longer am working in a team setting with those phenomenal people. So I think what I'm doing right now is fledgling. So I don't have a large team that I'm working with. So I do grieve the loss of a team. When it comes to recruitment, I had a love-hate relationship with recruitment because there's so much exhilarating about recruitment and there's so much challenging about recruitment. And actually, it's the story under that story is that my recruitment company started as an experiment. It was a placeholder for until something else came up, and it turned into 15. It was a 15-year placeholder. So I have, there's a lot of me looking at that chapter. But ultimately I loved the people I got to work with, the clients we served, and I had a beautiful closing moment in which, when we were moving out of the office, where I really could come to terms with, hey, I'm happy to close this door for the last time. And yes, I will miss it, but I'm okay to close it.
And I love that because I think missing something is not necessarily the same as grieving something. Missing something is sentimental. You remember the ups and downs, but there's not necessarily pain associated with it. Whereas grieving something, there's a pain associated with it. And I have found in many conversations with many folks who are going through different reinventions at midlife, the grieving part of it becomes a blocker for moving forward, as opposed to just missing something because you've walked into a different door, as in through a different door, and you're choosing to walk through a different door. Which brings me to another shift that I love that you outlined, which is shifting to connection. Because for me, this is one of the most important aspects of the second half of our life, particularly for men, is we men often associate our connection with our work colleagues and our identity as our work colleagues, maybe our sports team colleagues, depending on how much we play sport. And as we go into the second half of our life, for many of us, those two groups just fade away a little bit. And a previous guest on this show talked about us becoming wallflowers for our wives' friends, as in we hang on to our wife, our partner, our spouse, and their friends. You really promote the notion of connection in different type of ecosystems, and indeed you set up a whole business around ecosystems and cohorts. Talk to me about, first of all, connection and community, why you think that's important, and then let's talk about what you do in terms of setting those up.
Yeah, wow. And I'm chuckling as you're talking about wallflowers on our wives. Like, my wife has different groups of friends, and they all have their happy hour signals. So like at any given point, it's where's mom? I don't know. She's with one of her happy hour groups. And
that's what she's saying, Peter.
And although I have some really good friends, I don't have happy hour groups. So, anyways, I think, the concept of, we were never meant to do it alone. Like the concept of whenever we get to that space where we're just, we're operating solo, we're inward, we're not looking out, it doesn't yield the same impact on us as in subjective well-being, to use the psychological term, as when we're connecting with others. That moving to that outward mindset really does offer us something rich, that connectivity with other people, that commonality. Hey, I'm going through this, you're going through this too. And I do see women do it a lot better. They just do it a lot better. It's more part of their fabric, maybe more part of their history. With men, I think we've even joked about it, and I think it's been said several times. We make our friends early in life, and then we try to, keep those friendships alive, and we're not very good at it sometimes either. So the mindset around, who am I when it comes to community is really, to start small with one more connection, one phone call, one coffee, one walk. The concept of the group travel excursions that we're doing with Shift into Life actually are intentionally being designed to create a community experience around a travel experience, and usually around an adventure of some sort that allows for space and reflection and conversation. And so, looking for intentional things, volunteering, honest conversations, community, doesn't necessarily all have to get one magic button and all of a sudden I'm in community. It's about one intentional step after another.
And it can, as you said, it can be as simple as find someone to walk with and just walk and nothing else. We had Tim Houston on this show recently, who set up Mongrel's Men, which was it's a group for men, but his simple intention was when men walk shoulder to shoulder together as opposed to face at a meal, we're far more likely to talk. And so therefore the whole notion is let's just get out and walk the beach or run the beach. And he now has, I don't know how many said, like huge number of people involved in that group because it's an easy access point. And then of course, after you walk the beach, you go for coffee, and now go for coffee, you organize to have a second coffee, and that's when you start talking. So it could be as simple as a walk. I've got some folks coming on the show very soon who have set up a whole range of music clubs, book clubs, but they're all as simple as I'm reading a book. I think it's interesting, Peter. I think you should read, and how about we get together in a month's time and talk about the book, right? But most of us, as we hit midlife, find that harder and harder to do, from a male perspective at least. Yet it's what all the Harvard study into longevity showed is that sense of being in community is one of the biggest enablers of health and longevity.
Yeah, and we can find it in the simplest of ways, as you're saying, walking, volunteering, sitting down, for an intentional coffee, joining a book club. There's so many different ways that we would not have considered in our 20s necessarily, or maybe it happened even more naturally in our 20s. But now, when we ask ourselves the question, who do I want to see? What would be a great way to connect with them? There's answers to that. Yeah.
You've mentioned adventures and shift into life. And I love this idea of travel to a place, and it's more than just, I'm on a big bus tour. It's far different to that. Tell me more about what you're doing.
I've always had a phrase that I used in my business that we weren't going on a retreat, we were going on an advance. The concept of we weren't, necessarily going backwards. If we were going backwards, it was so we could, if we were reflecting, it was so we could go forward. So we've created, I tried marketing a couple of traditional retreats. Let's go away to the mountains. And then I discovered, and those were, although they would sell, they didn't sell like when we put our Camino walk together. And it was, hey, we're going to do this adventure together. And throughout that adventure, there's going to be meaningful opportunities for us to chat and to talk about something meaningful. So we created this, we call them trail talks, which were fueled by every day. Everybody got a postcard with some, some inspiration and some reflective questions. And then that served as pre-dinner conversation. We didn't make it the dinner conversation. We made it the happy hour conversation.
So you
And
do have a happy hour, right?
we did. I had 12 friends, 12 happy hours in Spain once. Yeah, so it was a beautiful. It's a beautiful experience when you're sharing that common goal to make the walk, to cover the kms, to hit the distance, and all the while because you're walking, your brain is freed up to move out of the urgent into more important conversations.
I
So it was
think I
beautiful.
shared. I think I shared with you once. I did a 7-day walk poetry event with David White in
Yes, you
Yorkshire a
did.
number of years ago.
Yeah.
Many folks know who David is, probably one of the more famous, if not the most famous poet in the world at the moment. But he has a lovely process where you spend 3 or 4 hours in the morning listening to, talking about ideas based around poetry. Then in the afternoon, you're hiking the Yorkshire hills and mountains. And by nature, you're thinking of questions that he has posed and talking about that while you're doing physical exercise. And of course, by the time the evening comes, you're both tired, refreshed, and you end up in a Yorkshire pub. And then, of course, the real conversations start happening there, and then you repeat that 7 times. And I've often thought back to that whole piece of what aspect of that was, the most liberating or exciting. And I can't point to any one aspect, but I've no doubt it's the walking and thinking about the conversations we had this morning and what's percolating for me as I'm walking up the mountain was just extraordinary. So I can absolutely understand why you're doing these tours, because they really appeal for sure.
I hope you come on one with us.
I'm fully intending to come on one. I was looking at your calendar this morning before you and I come on this talk. One of the things that I remember on that particular event in Yorkshire was overcoming change and overcoming actually wanting to make a major change and needing to overcome the fear of a major change was the key thing I remember of that. And I ended up selling my business, joining a US-based business on the back of that 7 days in Yorkshire, which was quite extraordinary. Where I got stuck was, for a while at least, was thinking, what's my first step? What's my first practical step? Given what you do and given what you've written about, I'm imagining many people get stuck at what's my next step or my first practical step, or what's the way of overcoming any fear of change. How do you think about that?
The movement away from like, this is what I want, to this is the steps for me to move towards, closer towards what I want, is a big step for people, and one that, quite honestly, quite often doesn't get made because the time, unpacking the want and aligning the want within us internally doesn't get us to the action phase. But I think it's always best to think of, it's not about blowing up your life. It's not about completely, starting over again. It's about, steps that will take you closer towards the person that you're becoming. If that includes a career switch or a life change, quite often we're dealing on our excursions, it's people who have made the life change and now they have to answer, who am I after this? Or the life change was made for them. We've had people who've lost spouses, people who have left marriages, people who have, their careers have left them, and they're trying to figure out. So you've got that inciting event that puts you in a position where you have to take some form of action. And then, but it's that, when it's connected to, I could drift, I don't need to take action. That's a different, that's a different conversation that we have with ourselves. And it usually starts with, we always talk about scales of 10. Like if we're 0 and 10, hypothetically we're at a 7. Well, what does movement towards 7.1 look like? Not jumping from 7 to 10, but what's a step that you could take that would take you to 7.1? Just a fractional step forward. I've always, and you're probably familiar with James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. And when I first I thought it was like atomic, huge, big, but no, they're micro, like the smallest micro changes you can make. So focusing on small change, not blowing everything up, and not becoming a brand new person, just becoming more of who you are and who you want to be.
Start close in. Take the first step.
Yes. Start close in. There you go.
Speaking of poetry, can I do something that I've never done on this show before? Can I read a poem to the author? A poem that you wrote that I genuinely mean this. This had a big impact on me when I read it. And I've read it many, many times since, and I've referred it to a few people. So I'd like to read it out to you. And I'd like you just to talk to it after you hear it. It's on page 29 of your book. It's called Packing Light. And I'm not going to do a David White and try to repeat all the lines as beautifully as he does. I'll read it out the only way I can read it, Peter. So it's called Packing Light. I used to travel with trunks, leather strapped, brass cornered, each one bulging with trophies from younger days. Ambition, opinion, a fondness for being right. I lugged them through my 30s, wheeled them into my 40s, and by 50, I was starting to wonder if maybe I didn't need 3 variations of the same self. So I started unpacking. Not all at once, just a few grudges here, a should or two there, that one awkward memory I kept under a sweater from the 90s, gone. It's not that I'm empty now, just lighter. Able to notice the birds again, to say I don't know without checking the mirror, to read poetry without looking for the point. The second half I've discovered isn't about adding more, but knowing what to leave behind. So you can carry a thermos of tea, a notebook, and both hands free.
Wow.
That's what I thought.
I've never had this experience either. So I thank you for it. It's quite honoring. Yeah.
It's a beautiful piece of work because it just talks to everything we've been talking about in a very profound way. The line, if I didn't need 3 variations of the same self, that's what hit me. I remember thinking, oh my goodness, that's so true. That's so true. Tell me about the poem from your perspective.
Well, I'll start there because the 3 variations of ourselves, like I think I've always been a big decade threshold celebrator, reflector. So I've like, when I think of myself in my 20s, when I think of myself in my 30s, 40s and 50s, that concept of I bring something from each of those decades into where I am today, and I don't need to bring all of it. So I don't need to bring, the insecurity, the drive and determination to prove to those in my circle from my 20s and 30s that I have value. I don't have to carry that. If I carry that with me, if that is a story that perpetuates itself and I'm still trying to, get the outward respect of different players in my life, then that's not going to be helpful. So when I think of the concept of moving forward, the packing lightly, the letting go, it plays as much of a role in moving forward as the as any future accumulation that you're going to do. Like the concept of letting go of stories. I'm a great storyteller. I've told myself fantastic stories over the course of my life about who I am or who I'm not, or what I can do, what I can't do. And so I used poetry in the book because it just tackles things from a different angle. And some people, like, the poetry will speak volumes to them, and others it won't be as meaningful to them. So there'll be more in the, too long didn't read bullet points. How can I move forward? But poetry is an opener. Like it's like it helps me to look at, to engage in story. So for me, the poem writing was very therapeutic. Actually, it was fun, and I wanted to have fun with them. I wanted them to have a levity.
Well, when I look back at your career, and I've done some searching on what you've done before and some internet interviews and you've done, etc., this seems to be, and correct me if I'm wrong here, this seems to be a new emergence for you in the sense of the way you write now is not akin to what I've seen before. Is that true, or B, are you just more public with the way of your writing now?
Yeah, subject matter. It's funny. It's a funny story. When I was in the recruitment business and I had different people reviewing the things that I was writing, sometimes they'd say, "Hey, that feels a little personal." Like, I think why don't we change the voice? There wasn't always a forum for like this. The work I'm doing now provides a forum for me to just talk from where I want to, and I didn't always have that freedom. I did English as a minor in university, and I really enjoyed it more than my business major. So, but I was 23 and my dad and I had a plan. So
and the world came along and left.
Yeah. There you go. It didn't include me being an English teacher. Yeah.
Right. And here you are writing beautiful English. It's interesting you say about poetry. I have a weekly newsletter that I send out, and I always include a poem in it. And for me, now in my 50s, reading poetry is not about looking for the point. It's about actually just seeing what emerges. And I'm aware that people who sign up and subscribe to our newsletter, some of them will never read the poems, and that's perfectly fine. But I get at least 2 or 3 messages a week from people going, "I'm not normally a poetry reader, but this thing at the end of your newsletter last week really hit me. So thank you for sharing that." So I'm glad you wrote a book on midlife transitions and midlife reinvention and crisis. That's not a crisis by including poetry, because it does allow access somewhere before. And as you say, both hands can be free, which is really cool.
With a thermos of tea.
With a thermos of tea. You can never go anywhere without a cup of tea. Being an Irishman, I subscribe to that hugely. What have I not asked you that I should have asked you so far?
You've asked me a lot. I think what you haven't asked me what I've learned through the process of creating this venture that I'm working on.
Peter, can I ask you a question I haven't asked you before? What are you learning from the process of doing what you're doing now?
So much is afoot in the world today. The concept of creating something that's community centered. I don't know. I actually don't know all the steps required to make that happen. So it's been a bit of trial and error, a little bit of let's release this to the world and let's see how the world responds. I think it's also, both of us have a marketing in our background. It's tougher to get messages where you want them to these days. So figuring that out. But I had probably applied a lot of the "if I build it, they will come" mentality, and I just think this is not going to be that easy. And it's because it's new subject matter for a lot of people, and it's subject matter that maybe some people just don't feel ready to tackle. I think it's I'm loving every minute of it, and I'm challenged by every minute of it as well. So I'm learning what it looks like to release something and to get little or no response to it.
Shifting into brave, I've no doubt.
It's true.
What would the 75-year-old version of you be asking you now, given what you've just said?
Are you still creating? Are you still are you still in a position of looking for what life will hold for you in the future? I think the 75-year-old version will likely ask me about, am I making sure I'm putting the connection piece in and around specifically taking my foot off the gas with respect to work or anything that's being created, that I'm focusing, that I won't have any regrets on the friendships I've built, the community I've built, the family that is being actually built underneath us with Emerger. We have 4 grandkids now. That's and we're so who am I in that space, making sure that I'm as present in that space as I can be.
Fantastic. It's a pleasure to have you here, Peter. Thank you for writing Shift, 7 Mindsets for an Inspired Midlife. You certainly inspired me on a plane to London with that book.
Yeah.
My last question for you is, what are your final words of wisdom for our listeners today?
Final words of wisdom would be, it's not about recreating yourself. It's not about blowing things up. It's about, moving closer, stepping closer into who you really are. And what moving towards will scratch those soul-based issues within yourself, those meaning issues. Yeah. That's my final word.
Beautiful. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening or watching, depending which platform you're accessing this podcast on. I hope you enjoyed it. I really got a lot from that conversation. And I will record a short episode next on what I've learned, my thoughts in the conversation, some reflections. And I'm going to do an experiment based upon what I've learned today. So you'll hear about that in the next episode. If you want a permanent reminder of what we chatted about or some of the key summary points, go to don'tlettheoldmanin.com/reflections and download that. In the meantime, don't let the old man in. We'll see you next time.